Wherever you are in the world or wherever you are on your journey, welcome to the Recovery Journey podcast with Horizon Behavioral Health, where we know recovery is possible and every day is a second chance. Are you struggling with substance use addiction or worried about a friend or a loved one? You're not alone in this fight. We're here with some special guests joining us from their unique place of recovery or a supportive role in helping others on their recovery journey. So today we're here to talk about recovery, and I know our listeners are hoping to hear from some of our brave guests here who have battled with addiction and are walking their own unique journey of recovery. And two of those folks we have here today is Stephanie Iannuzzi. Hey, Stephanie.
Hi.
And we also have Emily Pendell.
Hi.
Hi, Emily. And so Emily is a member of the recovery community here in Central Virginia, and Stephanie Iannuzzi is a registered certified peer recovery specialist. So welcome, you guys, and thanks for coming today.
Thanks for having us.
We also have here with us Matthew Noggle. Hey,
Hello.
Great to have you.
Glad to be here.
Matthew is a resident therapist at Horizon Behavioral Health, and he's here to kind of shine some light on some of the outpatient therapy programs that are available to folks here in the community. So we're excited to hear from him as well. So I would love to start off our conversation today by just talking with Stephanie and Emily here. Just help me know a little bit about you. Emily?
Yeah. My name is Emily, and I moved here to Central Virginia in 2015 to pursue an undergraduate degree in special education. Taught for a little bit, ended up heading toward grad school, and a little bit more about me. Let's see. I have a dog named Gunner. He's a golden retriever. He's 90 pounds. He thinks he's really small, but he's my baby. I have a very cool roommate who is also my mom, and it's really great to have, that relationship in your late 20s with your mom, because it's definitely less of the parent-child and more of the friendship role, which is really cool to see. I am currently training for a marathon in November. So,
Whoa.
Yeah, it'll be my first full marathon, so I'm a little nervous, but it's going well so far. I actually start officially training on the 18th.
That's so exciting.
I have a couple of family members locally, and I love to hang out with my best friend and my boyfriend pretty much all day, every day. And I also work at a day support locally, Harmony Day Support, where we service over 150 individuals with various special needs. So my role there is being the internal problem solver. So any sort of requests or issues that they may have within our facility, I get to be the contact person for all of that, which is really great. It's awesome to have those relationships with people.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It sounds like you lead a very full and happy and wonderful life.
It is now.
Oh, good. Yeah. It takes a minute to get there, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. And we're definitely going to talk a little bit about that today. Stephanie, how about you? Let's hear a little bit about you.
I'm originally second generation Italian. Grew up in South Jersey and came here by way of various different circumstances. Attended Liberty University, got my master's in human resource development, and now I am, through life circumstances, have the blessing of working at Horizon Behavioral Health, which was my first choice after I did my certified peer recovery specialist training. And I work with a fantastic team of clinicians and clients. I love being in the intensive outpatient groups, and I have various other assignments that I'm involved with. And I love sharing what I have been through my 70 plus years of experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, we are excited to tap into those 70 plus years here in our conversation a little bit here today.
Don't feel like it.
So what brings you ladies here today? I know we're here to talk about recovery. We're here to have a real conversation about addiction and substances and, the struggles that come along with decisions in life that, sometimes take us down a road where we, realize this isn't me. This isn't the life I want to lead. And I know our listeners would love to hear a little bit more about what brings you to this place here where you've got a microphone in front of you and you're ready to talk about, life's kind of struggles and how addiction has been a part of that.
Sure. For me, my background, so I don't have any history of addiction within my family, within any sort of close friends or relatives that I knew growing up. So the only picture I had of addiction was through media, through videos, through any sort of like Hollywood version of addiction. And so I am a recovering alcoholic, and I will have 2 years in August of sobriety time.
All right. I'd love to hear that.
Which we can definitely get into more. But, I didn't have an understanding of what addiction was. So when I found myself drinking to blackout almost every single night towards the end of my addiction, I didn't realize it was a problem. And addiction and talking about addiction is really important for me, to have the conversation, to kind of let other people know that it's okay to talk about these things. It's so great to know that there are resources out there to reach out for help. And ultimately, for me, that decision to get better had to come from me. It could not come from anybody else. And it wasn't that I didn't have people in my life that were trying. It was I had to make the decision for myself, because there's no human power that could have gotten me sober. And there was no sort of way to be loved into recovery. There was nothing that anybody else could do to save me. And I think that's an important thing that I have learned in my own recovery journey, is that I have to choose recovery for myself.
Every single day too, right? It's
yes.
Not like one time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Lifelong commitment.
Yeah.
And Stephanie, how about you? Talk about a lifelong commitment.
This is definitely a lifelong commitment. My journey started, I guess, from childhood. Being, like I said, Italian, food was definitely taught to me as a solace, as a comfort. Anytime we got fussy, Mom would give us food to quiet us down. So I learned at a very young age to cope with a substance. Didn't have to be drugs, but at the time it was sugar. And we know now that sugar is as addictive as cocaine.
Yeah.
So that was my early journey. And I basically struggled with weight my entire life. And I didn't realize it as a teenager. I was put on diet medication, which we now know is speed. And I stopped that for a while. And I had tumultuous relationships as a young person. And after my daughter was born, my weight accelerated, which caused relationship problems. I didn't realize I had actually a food addiction. That was my first, let's put it this way, drug of choice. And my first introduction to 12-step programs was in the 1980s with Overeaters Anonymous. So as time went on, my weight yo-yoed back and forth. And it just got to a point where my top weight was 287 pounds, and I'm only 4'10". So I had grown quite out of even size 26 clothing. I went and had gastric bypass, and I got the weight off. I got to a very decent 150 pounds. And they kind of mentioned to me about being careful with alcohol. But I don't think in 2002, when I had this surgery, they knew how devastating alcohol could be. It was explained to me that alcohol, because of the alteration of my intestines and my stomach, would go right into my bloodstream. And like most addictions, it started off very, very innocently. And as tolerance increased, it did get to the point where it went from 1 glass to 2 glasses to a bottle to 2 bottles to a box. It got to the point where I was blacking out like Emily. I would drink until I fell asleep when I got home from work. My glass was never empty until I just passed out. And then it finally got to the point where it no longer worked. And I no longer got the same results, the same feelings. And fortunately, I had always had a fear of other substances. But I know of quite a few people, when the alcohol stops working, they add other drugs to get that same feeling again. So through the legal system, I found myself in rehab, and that was an eye-opener. I had no intentions of getting into rehab, but to cover myself with the legal system, I got into rehab, and that's where I realized I really had a problem. There were other people there that I could relate to. And when I was done with rehab, I went into intensive outpatient with another counseling service in Lynchburg. And I also was seeking out disability. So I needed a psychologist, psychiatrist approval to get that disability. And through that, I discovered I was bipolar. So now I am dual diagnosed and started understanding more and more about what was going on with me. So after I went through my journey of recovery, I decided that I wanted to help others, because this is a journey. It's a struggle. It's not a one and done. It is an ongoing process. I now have 10 years sober. But again, it's a one day at a time thing. And just because I have that length of time does not mean I'm home clear. Because that roaring lion is in there waiting at any moment to pounce. So I have to be on my game.
Well, we all do. And, temptations in life can come in so many forms, right? I'm so glad that you were able to share a little bit about your previous history, right? Comparing, you said the sugar and cocaine and our body's response, and how we know that those things actually impact our brain. And in previous episodes, we've talked a little bit about how that works. And it really does help us to kind of view addiction for what it is. And it's a brain illness, right? And it's something that anybody could struggle from. It doesn't matter. It's regardless of background or, genetic history and all of the things. It's something that, anybody can find themselves in a place where, like you said, it's little things that kind of take you to a place where you realize, where am I? And, I don't recognize this person that I've been. And, hopefully and thankfully for those here, you ladies, you came to that realization, and, you had the support to be able to do something about it and make a change in your life. So I applaud both of you.
And the other thing I wanted to mention was, after I was able to get sober, I transferred my addiction back to sugar and gained about 50 pounds. And then I knew I needed to get help. I did not want to go back up to the 287 because there's some physical problems that people don't realize when you're that size. But not being able to fit into a restaurant table, not being able to go on a roller coaster, having to use a handicapped bathroom because you can't fit in a regular stall. So my concern a lot of times when I'm speaking with my clients and they want to switch from one thing to another, it can be a vicious cycle. I do warn my clients that, okay, it's legal to use this or that, but it can lead you back to your drug of choice. So that's really, really pertinent.
And since you brought it up, talk to me a little bit about, is it positive replacement, right? Where, you may be living a lifestyle where you spend a huge chunk of your time perhaps actively using substances, right? And a huge amount of your resources. So when you decide to make that change in your life, we have to replace that time with something. So what is something that has worked for both of you, having found a place of recovery that, you've been able to kind of replace that time with healthy coping mechanisms or hobbies or habits?
Yeah. It's so funny because I have very similar background to Stephanie, where I had gained a lot of weight after my undergrad and college. And then I decided, you know what, I'm going to take charge of my health. This is going to be great. I lost over 100 pounds. I was really strict with certain diets. It was great. But I supplemented the food with alcohol, and alcohol made me social, made me outgoing. I was losing weight. I'm getting attention from people. Like, it was like the trifecta. It was perfect. I was like, everything's going my way. This is great. But then being who I am and having an addictive personality and having the disease of addiction, looks started not to matter as long as I was getting my fix with alcohol. And so I supplemented that, and everything else just started to fade away because all I eventually cared about was, where am I going to get my next drink? And if I didn't have one in my hand, I was on my way to the liquor store to go get it. And during that time, I took my health, I had a very toxic relationship with my health. I had very disordered eating. I supplemented, again, all of my food intake was just going to be alcohol instead. So in coming into recovery, I'm a participant in Alcoholics Anonymous, which has been one of the best tools for my recovery. But one of the key mantras that said is you need to change people, places, and things. Well, I didn't really have people left in my life anymore. I had chosen alcohol over a lot of relationships. Places, I was living with my mom at the time, and I didn't have money to go live in another place, and I certainly didn't trust myself to go live in another place. But what I could change was those things. And so I started getting back into the gym, prioritizing my health. Physical exercise can also be an addiction too. So I had to, I have to be wary of that, but I like my downtime a little too much. So I don't think I'm at the point where I'm like going to stay on the treadmill all day. But I have found so much reward intrinsically through running, and it is not something that I actively chose for myself. My boyfriend is a runner. He's really into it. He is way faster than I am, but he was like, just try it, do it. We've competed in a couple local events and stuff like that. And like, I've actually done well, which is great because I love to challenge myself. And it's really great to see the fruits of those labors and really challenge myself physically. And if I'm having a bad day, I will go exercise and, try and rewire my brain in a natural and healthy way rather than looking towards, alcohol first and foremost, but any other substance, because I could easily fall back into, I'm going to go, eat my feelings, or I'm just going to sit in my bedroom in the dark and feel sorry for myself. And, recovery is such an active word. Like, I consider myself a recovering alcoholic. I never want to say that for me, I am recovered, because we say all the time that alcoholism is doing push-ups in the parking lot and it's waiting for you to relapse. And it's such a dangerous and tricky disease. But at the same time, if I'm proactive about it, if I am maintaining good physical and mental and spiritual health, like that is going to be the best thing for my recovery long term. But I can't also look into the future too far. I just have today, and that's all I have to focus on is, am I going to stay sober today? Perfect. No matter how good or bad my day goes, sobriety and staying sober is such a victory, even within those 24 hours. And I have to remind myself of that because it can easily become very mundane to be like, oh, yeah, like, life gets in the way and I have different experiences and instances and issues that come up in a daily basis. And I can get so bogged down with like life itself. And I have to take a step back and realize like it is a miracle to be alive today. It is a miracle that I am no longer enslaved to alcoholism today. And I have to maintain that sense of gratitude that no matter how bad life gets, picking up a drink is never going to be the answer for me.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you shared that because, we often, I think, we can't help but downplay how important celebrating those small victories are because they may seem small, but in the grand scheme of life, they're huge. They're so huge. And, I heard what Stephanie said as well about, when she really came to the place of realizing that addiction was something that had grabbed a hold of her and you had, just decided that you were going to change your life was when you were a part of the IOP program, which is intensive outpatient services. Could you tell us a little bit more about your experience? And I think now, Stephanie, you work with some clients who are also a part of, taking part of those services. So I'd love to, excited to hear about what Matthew has to share as well, as I know, he's a part of some of our therapeutic programs here at Horizon.
Well, like I said, it actually started in rehab where I started to understand the brain and how addiction affects the brain. So I started realizing this was not a moral issue. It was not a values issue. I wasn't a bad person. This had slowly developed into an actual disease of the brain. And I was able to use the intensive outpatient groups after I got out of out of rehab, because wraparound services are so needed for people. And for myself, it's a lifelong thing because I was able to share in rehab with other people. I was able to understand from others that I wasn't alone. They were dealing with a lot of the same things like Emily had shared. As I was listening to her, I could, hear myself where, that little birdie is in the back of the head still. And I was able to get out a lot of things that I needed and I didn't realize I was dealing with. And by being able to share in community with others, where community is very important. When I was early in recovery, I went to 3 AA meetings a day, not a week, a day. I went to the 7 o'clock, the 12 o'clock, and the 8 o'clock. I was to the point where I could not get from 1 hour to the next. And I could hold on 4 hours to the next meeting. And that got me through. I was so honest and veneer in my IOP groups, and I guess a little too open, that the other members had to have me go to separate counseling because they couldn't handle some of the stuff I was sharing because it was really raw. So,
what a great example of how, group therapy paired with individual therapy, paired with services like intensive outpatient therapy. You had mentioned wraparound services. Like, it's so important for folks to know that those different avenues of treatment are there, and that, there's a fit for everybody, right? I mean, people have, of course, the option to decide what's going to be a best fit for them.
Everybody has their own journey.
Yeah.
Like 12 steps are not for everybody. There are other programs. There is Smart Recovery. There is Celebrate Recovery, which is a Christian-based program, which I got myself actually involved in and ended up being a facilitator for several years for the women's addiction group. And their idea of going through the 12 steps was a grueling 1-year process with workbooks. That process for me in doing my 4-step inventory, which, for people that don't understand that's like total spring cleaning of your entire life.
Mm-hmm.
Because after I was able to do a total spring cleaning of my life, then all I had to do was the daily pickup and the daily straightening up. And then if something came up, then if I had to do a spring cleaning again, I did. Because in early recovery, you don't really understand the layers of yourself.
Mm.
And I don't think if I had unpacked all of the layers of myself,
Mm-hmm.
I could have handled it all at once. So that for me was a process.
Absolutely. It sounds like part of that journey on recovery was a lot of self-awareness, and that led to the ability for you to make realistic goals for yourself. Like you said, you knew that you couldn't make it 1 hour, 4 hours. And so you chose the path that was going to get you to what you needed and what your goal was, which was to achieve recovery. And I'm sure, I know that some of our outpatient therapy options out there, Horizon provides some, there's a lot of other providers in the Lynchburg and Central Virginia community, as well as across the world, that, employ a lot of evidence-based practices to help people set those realistic goals. And as Stephanie was starting to touch on, also get to unpack some of the personal things in your life that may have gotten you to where, you are today, as far as, struggling with some sort of addiction, whatever that addiction may be. So Matthew, we have here with us our outpatient therapist, who's a specialist in these kind of evidence-based practices. I'd love to hear a little bit about, how do you get to work with your clients in setting some of those goals, and what does that look like?
When I set goals with my clients, I just try to meet them where they are, because like Stephanie said, everyone is on their own journey, and sometimes, people aren't ready to bare their soul in front of other people who may have the same or similar experiences as them, because they feel too vulnerable to do that. And so individual therapy, to me, is a way for people to explore that on their own and get some type of perspective on the things that have happened to them. Because a lot of people who become alcoholics or addicts of some, or dependent upon some unhealthy
substance
or habit.
Yeah.
Like, do that because they've had some negative traumatic experiences in their life that they don't know how to unpack.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and for me, I don't have a substance problem. Like, that's not something that I have experience with, but I do have experience with people in my family who were impacted by people who had substance problems. Like, I talk sometimes in IOP about my great-grandmother, who was an alcoholic, was never able to manage her addiction, in her life, and that impacted her kids in a profoundly negative way that then impacted my parents, their generation, and then that had a factor in how I was raised as well.
Yeah. And, we know that addiction doesn't just impact the person that's in the throes of that battle. It also impacts everybody in the whole family, right? So did you guys have conversations about that? Is that something that you guys openly discussed, or throughout childhood, is it just something that
I know as a kid, I knew that my great-grandmother had an alcohol problem, the extent to which was not revealed to me because of how dramatic. It got to like some soap opera levels of drama and complications because of that. And like there are stories. I'm sure I know only a fraction of the stories, but I know the things that were important for me to know. But as a kid, I was given the kid appropriate levels of information that I needed. And so like growing up, I was aware that, alcohol was potentially fine. There's some benefit to that. There are examples of healthy alcohol consumption, but I also knew from stories that I had been told that there were also very unhealthy levels of consumption.
So we talked a little bit about, your experience having grown up in a family and, how addiction does impact the whole family. So if there's family members that are listening in here on the call today and they are worried about somebody that they love, or it could be a friend, just could be somebody in the community that they know, how can they, tell and recognize signs that somebody may be struggling, and how do they have that conversation? What does that look like?
I think with going to someone that you care about with your concerns is always a tricky thing, because you want on the one hand to care for them and be empathetic and caring for them, loving even. But on the other hand, you have some concerns about what they're doing with their life, the things that are going on. Mm-hmm. And so
makes you a little bit biased, doesn't it?
Yes. So, I think it's always best to stick to the facts, because these things can get very emotional very quickly. Mm-hmm. And I do a lot of work with dialectical behavior therapy, which very quickly has this idea that the best way forward in any situation is to approach from both an emotion and a logic frame of mind. Mm-hmm. So I tell people often, approach a situation looking at the facts, and your emotions, your concerns are also facts. Mm-hmm. So approaching someone that you're concerned about with facts about the situation they're in, that you've noticed some ways in which they've dropped the ball on some things, that the things in their life have changed.
They're missing appointments,
missing appointments, looking disheveled.
Yeah.
Showing up like the personality has changed, and things like that. And try to avoid judgment, because this is a very difficult thing.
Or accusations. Yeah. Right.
And even when approaching with facts, someone who is in active addiction may not be in a place where they can really hear those things. Mm-hmm. But it can plant the seed to for them to think about later, is like, do I have a problem? Is there a sign that I need to change my drinking or change my substance use in some way? So
yeah,
even if they don't immediately start going to counseling or AA or 12-step programs, there can be benefits,
right? Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. Don't never be discouraged by somebody's response in a way that would prevent you from still caring and still reaching out and asking them how they are, and helping them to understand, or helping them to realize like what's changing in their lives, because you care for them, right? Ladies, you guys are here on the call, and we've talked a little bit about the places in life where you realized, you were struggling with addiction, and you just like came to the realization that something needs to be done about it, right? What are some things, or who are some people that reached out to you? What did they do? What did they say? What helped?
For me, I was facing some pretty serious legal issues. And it wasn't like a court mandated, oh, you have to go to X amount of 12-step or AA meetings or anything like that. Everybody in my family, I traumatized my family with my addiction. I really did. And they were so fed up with me and my actions and what my drinking was doing, not just to me, but to them as well. And they just said, you have got to get help. And at that point, I knew like it was a literal act of God that I had been in all of those situations to get me to a point where I realized, okay, I probably have a little bit of a problem and I should probably address it. But I mean, even being in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, it took me a very long time to even realize that I was an addict, that I had these addictive tendencies, that I had every single personality trait. Some of the stories that are shared in those rooms, I first walked in and I was like, what am I going to have in common with a bunch of like middle-aged white men? Like, what are they going to say that's going to change me and get me better? But as soon as I just sat down and listened to their stories, I was like, oh, I've done that. Oh, I felt that way. Oh, I've experienced that before. And all of a sudden it was just like these walls came down and my eyes were open to, oh, okay, so I relate to literally everything these people are saying, and they all say that they're alcoholics. I must be an alcoholic too. And it wasn't like my very first meeting, everything was okay and I never had to go again. I had to do 90 meetings in 90 days because I couldn't make it, more than a couple hours without having a meeting. I was very blessed to have my best friend who I actually met through the program. She came to my side and she was like, let's go to this meeting together. And we talked and we hung out. And, it's so crazy because she was my biggest supporter in my early recovery. And in the meantime, my family, again, none of us knew about addiction. Nobody knew what that looked like. I'm kind of the
first one through the gate in the family. Huh?
I'm the crash test dummy in the family. So they're the ones seeing all of the results of what alcoholism looks like in recovery and all of that stuff. So it was on me to kind of explain to them, hey, this is what I'm doing. And they were so supportive of it. And, I had a lot of work to do, and I still do, but especially in early recovery, it was just so much emotion and anger and frustration, and just all of these things in my life had completely been, I won't even say taken away from me. I gave it away because that's what alcoholism does. Like, it wasn't even that like I felt like I was being treated unfairly or lost so much. I gave it away because I chose alcohol over everything else in my life. So, navigating that early recovery, I would not be where I am without the love and support of my family, without the love and support of my friends that I have through the program, but like especially in handling those situations where you as an outsider who hasn't struggled with addiction notice these things. It is so difficult to relay that concern to someone. And I'll use myself specifically. I was so defensive. I didn't want to hear it because I don't have a problem. What are you talking about? I just like to have fun. And you try to like gaslight them into thinking like, I don't have a problem. You're the one with the problem. I'm fine. Meanwhile, I'm miserable. I hate myself. There's just so many things in my life that are awful because of my addiction. And then that gave me kind of the free pass to blame them for all of my problems, which I then drank over because I was like, well, I'll show them that I don't have a problem by getting drunk, which literally proved nothing other than you're an alcoholic, duh. So I would just say be present for them, come to them with love and with just no judgment, and just share where you're at with them and what you've noticed, and
facts,
and with the facts and the feelings. Yeah. And if they don't accept it, it is not your fault because you are coming to them in love. I mean, it's a tough tough disease, and there is no right answer. There's no manual, there's no handbook. If there was, I would have written it and made millions by now, but it's just such a tricky situation to even give a real answer to, because it is case to case. My program looks different than Stephanie's program because it works for her and it probably wouldn't work for me, and vice versa. It has to be personal to that person. So unfortunately, there really is no like easy answer of like, this is what you tell them. Here's the combination of words. They're going to get sober and everybody's going to be happy, because that's just it's not how it works, unfortunately. And sometimes it takes tough love, and it takes them, removing themselves from your life to really feel like, okay, like this is isolating me even further from human contact. And I'm losing, all of these friendships and relationships because I'm choosing selfishly alcohol over everything else. And, sometimes that's the key to get people into a program, or to decide that they need, rehab or IOP or any sort of services that say, hey, I'm self-aware enough to see that I don't have anybody left to help me or to reach out or to support me.
Yeah. And, but too, based on the experiences you shared, it sounds like sometimes it really takes getting into a place where you feel so uncomfortable, right? And, knowing that something's got to change, right? And I know there's probably so many folks. I know Stephanie here, as a registered certified peer recovery support specialist, she sees a lot of different folks in a lot of different phases of life. And Stephanie, would you say a lot of folks that you work with, are they in a place where they are just unsure about whether treatment is something that they're ready for? And, do they ever, just some of the folks,
People are in different phases that come to us. They'll come to us because they've had a DUI, because court has made them come to us. CPS is taking their children, or they're being threatened that their kids will be taken. Some of our clients will heed those warnings. And other of our clients are at the place where, oh, I slipped up, the cops caught me, this isn't going to happen again, I just have to get through this, and I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. Other people realize the cost of what their actions have done, and that's their wake-up call. Everyone has their own wake-up call. This is kind of personal, but my daughter arranged for me to go to rehab, and my wake-up call was being taken to jail and her picking me up and making those arrangements to go to rehab. I would have never imagined in my wildest imagination that I would be in that position. That was my wake-up call. Some people, like I said, having their children taken, that's their wake-up call. We always say, you have to reach a bottom to reach out and get help. But some people's bottoms are different than other people's bottoms. And then, like I said, everybody's journey is their own. They may hit a bottom, but then find out there is a deeper, darker bottom.
And that's so important for us to, talk about here today, because that's why we're here. That's why we're having these conversations and trying to connect with those out there, maybe some of our listeners that, are in a place, and, we can avoid, there's things that we can do to avoid getting to that place of rock bottom, like having these early conversations with loved ones, and being prepared to support others on their journey, like Stephanie and Matthew and just the folks here in the community that have dedicated themselves to caring and to supporting people along their recovery journey is so important. It's so important for people to know that that's there for them. So Stephanie, I'm curious, somebody that's looking at taking advantage of those resources, that's feeling nervous that they're not ready to make that kind of commitment. And, part of them doesn't want to let go to the things in their life, that they're currently involved in. What happens if somebody makes a commitment to treatment and then something happens where they slip up or they do something to compromise their sobriety? What happens to their relationship with the folks that are supporting them? Do we just head out of town and tell them they're on their own, or do we stand by them through that?
Family members really don't understand the cycle. Relapse is part of the journey. To me, relapse is a learning experience as to what not to do the next time.
Mm-hmm.
And with our clients in group, we try as hard as possible to get that message across that relapse is going to happen. It usually will. The thing of it is not to beat yourself up, because if you beat yourself up, you're going to say, I'm a lousy person. I might as well just keep going. Instead of, we try to instill resilience.
Yeah.
Absolute resilience in our clients so that they manage to understand or start kind of looking at what was it, what triggered that relapse, what happened. I have a client right now. Her mother just passed, and she had a relapse. And the other night, I suggested to her to just, for the next time, this was a learning experience. Fortunately, she has resilience and she's doing fantastic. But to plan for future mothers' birthdays, Christmas, other things that are going to come up, we try to hammer in triggers to our clients so that they are very aware of things. Besides people, places, and things, I went over a thing for 4th of July. That is one of the biggest drinking times of the year. New Year's, Mardi Gras. There are events that you don't even realize. And I was listening to a YouTube video of a woman who was talking about her triggers. So if she went to a bar with some friends, just the feeling of a bar stool, the feeling of a bar table, or just not even that scenario, but being maybe at McDonald's and hearing ice, the tinkle of ice in a glass. Just there could be, for each person, a plethora of triggers that they're not even aware of.
And you're saying there's ways, such as through working with other people and, supportive services, ways that you can be prepared to respond when you do feel triggered and to recognize those triggers?
Yeah. And that's what we try to educate our clients to be aware of. And to give them alternate resources to counteract escapes. Like, I will tell my friends, or I'll tell my clients, that if you know that you're kind of having to go to a family thing, make sure your car is parked where you can get away. To get yourself a glass of soda so you feel like you're holding something where everybody else is holding something. There are many, many ways of preparing yourself. And if you know that there's going to be a lot of alcohol at the event, go for the first hour before things start happening and then leave. You've made your appearance. Or on the opposite end, if cocktail hour is before food's being served, come late. Or even eat something before you go to an event, because having something in your stomach helps. There's a lot of ways to avoid a relapse, a lot of ways. But until a client is educated in those ways, they're susceptible.
Yeah, we're stuck out there on the battlefield with no armor, no idea what's going to come next. Yeah.
And I think also, jumping off that idea, like one of the things I encourage my clients, both individual and in groups, is to practice the coping skills before they actually get triggered. Because, it's one thing, I can give an entire box of coping skills to people. And
the tool's only as good as you know how to use it, right?
Right. And, when you're in the middle of that crisis situation, like you're triggered, you really want to have the drink, or you really want to take a hit of something, like that is not a great time to practice a new coping skill.
Right.
Because you're not sure what you're really doing. And you're just kind of like looking at the instructions or like trying to figure out what you're doing, not really sure. And then, you still have the craving. The trigger is still there. So I tell people, practice these things like in therapy, in group, and then also at home, because you never know when something is going to happen. Like, unfortunately, triggers do come up at seemingly random times. And if you have the practice under your belt, if you have like the muscle memory or the brain capacity, the brain experience of using the skill, then it's more likely that it's going to help in the moment versus, wow, I've just got hit with a craving and I have no idea what to do. And I can't remember any of the things that we've talked about in therapy because I didn't practice them.
Yeah, what a great tool, and to be able to, again, know how to use it and how important practice is. That's so important. I'm so glad you brought that up, Matthew.
Some of the coping skills that I have employed, now granted, I know myself, so I'm not going to go out to a bar and hang out. It has no benefit for me, and I know that of myself. There's plenty of other people in recovery that can do that. I'm a little jealous of them, but I have to remain neutral about alcohol. It's not, oh, it's the devil and keep it away from me. You go and live your life. I will live mine, and I just happen to have to choose sobriety over everything else. But at the same time, I've been at work events where there was this big open bar, and, mercifully, I had, prayed beforehand. I was like, I just don't want to worry about it. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to deal with it. And fortunately, being at this big event with an open bar was not a trigger for me. And people had even asked, like, oh, are you going to get a drink? And I was like, oh, no, I don't drink. And that kind of, everybody was just like, oh, okay. And then moved on with their life because they got their drink and they didn't care. Which, if somebody were to ask a little bit more questions, I usually use marathon training as my excuse. I'm like, oh no, I'm training for a marathon. Like, I don't need to go into my whole like backstory and trauma of being an addict.
Yeah.
So I have that as like my general excuse. But then in other situations, like I'm house sitting in the next couple weeks. And so I told the person that I'm house sitting for, I was like, hey, I know you have alcohol in the house. I can't be around it. So if you could either lock it up, throw away the key, or get rid of it and remove it from the house for me, that would just be great. And so they're very respectful and receptive of me setting that boundary before it even becomes a problem. So just like Stephanie and Matt were sharing, me being proactive about future events has been such a big help for me in sustaining my recovery, because no, I can't plan that far in the future about, oh, am I going to be sober that day? But I can sure ensure that the environment is as prepared as possible for me to stay sober in those instances. Because alcoholism is sneaky, and I will justify like, oh, well, I won't touch it if it's in the house. My brain knows every single corner that alcohol is in. And if not, I will find it. I'm an alcoholic. I will seek it out. But I know that of myself. So to be proactive is going to be the best thing for me in my recovery in those future situations.
And they say in the prevention world, what is predictable is preventable. And I had never thought to apply that when we're talking about substances and addiction, but it is so true. There really are so many tools and things you can be prepared with so that you have a plan in place to respond to triggers when they hit, or, temptations as they come about, throughout the day. So thank you all for sharing that with our listeners today. One last question for those folks here. What has been one of the biggest catalysts to achieving recovery for you in your life?
I think for me, my faith in God, and it's kind of such a scary answer to have, but I think my faith in God has been truly the only thing that has kept me sober. And what I mean by that is no matter how hard anybody in my life tried to help me get sober, no matter the circumstances that I put myself in, I couldn't get myself sober. They couldn't get me sober. There was nothing on this earth that could get me sober. So I believe that it was God who had, consequences happen to me because of my actions. And I take full responsibility for everything that I've done while in active addiction, which also took a lot of time to arrive at that point. But I take full responsibility because no one forced me to drink. I was the one that was drinking. And, with that being said, I grew up in a very religious household. I have a lot of background knowledge of a God of the Bible and the Christian faith. But I really had to simplify that idea of God, because for me, I'm going to overcomplicate it, and I'm going to rationalize my way into, well, I know more than God, and I'm just going to go out and drink and everything will be fine. And, AA will still be there even if I relapse. And, all of these like wrong ways of thinking. So I have to keep my concept of God very simple in order for that to sustain my sobriety. And I just keep it to God loves me. God's perfect, because I can't argue with perfect. And God is forgiving, because if he's not forgiving, I'm not going to be able to forgive myself. I will not be able to forgive others, and others won't be able to forgive me. So having the presence of God and a spiritual foundation in my life has been the one thing that really has kept me sober and gotten me sober in the first place, because I can reach out to people. What if they don't pick up their phone? I can read things. What if I don't find the right set of words? What do I have left as my last line of defense between me and a bottle? It's going to have to be God for me.
Thanks for sharing that, Emily. And how about you, Stephanie?
Oh my gosh. Emily could not have put it in a more perfect way. I have basically learned the same thing that Emily has. It's a spiritual matter for me. I remember a lot of problems. For me, not superstitious. Things always came in threes. And I remember holding on to my front door and looking outside and looking up and screaming at the top of my lungs for God to help me. Because I would always wait until I had tried everything I could try, being the control freak that I was, till I would finally get on my knees and ask for help. And when I saw God step in for me and help me through things. And again, a father disciplines a child because he loves them. So now, when things happen, I go, all right, Lord, you knew this was going to happen. You know how it's going to get solved. Just give me the wisdom to know what steps you want me to take in order to do your will. But Emily, you put it beautifully.
Thank you.
I couldn't have said it any better.
I want to thank you all for being so vulnerable and sharing some of those pieces of your journey. And we know that looks different for everybody, but it's so special to hear from you both who, some of this may be recent and, this is so personal. And it's just amazing to know that there are people out there in this community, in that community, across the world, across the country that want to have these conversations. And I just would love to take the opportunity to remind our listeners that there are people around you that want to hear you and want to have these conversations, and just to be brave and be open. And sometimes it's just taking the first step and being honest, not just with yourself, but with the person next to you. And you never know, you might surprise yourself, and they might be that person that you need in that moment. So thank you all so much. I appreciate that. We also have Marianne Powell here with us today. Hi, Marianne.
Good morning.
She is our program manager that oversees some of our outpatient services provided at Horizon Behavioral Health. So Marianne, you have such an extensive knowledge of different treatment options for individuals, no matter what phase of, recovery they're in. And so I've got a question here for you. When can someone know if treatment is probably the next best step, either for themselves or for a loved one?
So as several of the members mentioned earlier, we get a lot of people that are kind of referred to us. So it's not always their idea to come in.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that happens where people, some things have happened and they're like, I'm ready to make a change on my own. But, for a lot of people, it's being pushed by an outside source. We have a lot of people who've gotten DUIs that are referred. We get people with the Department of Social Services. It could be related to a job, especially for people who are doing safety-sensitive work like driving, things like that. But I think for a lot of people, it's kind of realizing I'm not living life up to my values. I'm not living life the way that I want to live my life. Relationships are suffering. Maybe jobs are suffering. And just they're seeing things, they're not going the way that I thought they would go in my life, not reaching my goals and my potential.
And you mentioned that, a lot of times folks don't just reach out on their own. And so usually a referral steps in to support them in that first step. So what are some of those common fears or maybe myths about treatment that might discourage or make somebody hesitate to reaching out and taking that first step on their own?
Well, like you mentioned earlier, stigma is still a big issue. It's a big issue for people with substance issues, mental health issues. Asking for help. We live in a country that focuses a lot on being independent, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, solve your own problems. And this is not an area where you can do that. I always tell people, if you could have fixed this problem on your own, you would have already done it, because you're having these consequences in your life that, you never wanted. You never wanted to be in this position with the legal system, or relationship problems, or risking your freedom, or risking having your children. You never wanted to be in those places. And if you could have made a decision and stopped the problem behavior on your own, you would have already done it. So that's important for people to know.
And earlier in the episode, we talked about wraparound services. So that term may be unfamiliar to some of our listeners. What does that look like? And is that something you can expect from organizations like Horizon, like our community service boards that serve individuals across Virginia?
Yes. I mean, many of our clients at Horizon with substance issues also have mental health issues. Many of them have co-occurring chronic medical issues and, trauma, past, lots of things that they're dealing with in life, homelessness, different things. And you can't just focus on one area of a person and expect them to be able to change their whole life and get into recovery without addressing all of those needs that they have.
Right. It's like playing whack-a-mole if we were to try to do it one by one, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So we're going to our admissions department does comprehensive assessments at Horizon, and they refer to all kinds of services that we have. And then once people are in the services, they're also linked to other resources. So, a person in our intensive outpatient program, for instance, may be coming to our group therapy. They may also be getting some individual therapy. They are working with the peers like Stephanie. They may be going to support programs in the community. They may have a case manager who's working with them to help link them to medical care, or if they have food insecurity, or help to get a job. So we want to make sure that people have access to everything they need to be successful in their recovery, reduce barriers. Transportation is a barrier. Childcare is a barrier. So we want to make sure that we link people to resources to help reduce those barriers so they can get the most out of their care.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, at least as far as Horizon, is that first step can look like coming to our Langhorne Wellness Center on Langhorne Road in Lynchburg, Virginia, where we offer same-day assessments. So a person can come in from 8:30 a.m. to 3 p.m. and be seen by a provider that day. Wow, that is just amazing. And how important do you think it is, Marianne, for folks to be able to, when they're ready to say, okay, today's the day, that there's an opportunity there for them to be seen that day?
Yeah, I think that's really important because, as we all know, the motivation may shift. You may be coming in to ask for help because of something that's happened, or just a moment of clarity where you're saying, hey, I really want to do this today. And if we put up barriers such as a waiting list, things like that, we try to avoid that whenever we can, because we don't, and we're talking about people's lives. I mean, some people are out there overdosing right now. And, we want to make sure that we're getting people into the services that they are willing to engage in a timely manner so that they know that there is help and support for them and they don't have to go back out there tomorrow and maybe risk their life.
So what could somebody expect the day that they walk in the door and they reach out and ask for help? Does our team make a recommendation for services?
Yeah, so the assessment process is a clinical process where you're meeting with a therapist who's going to do an assessment. They're going to, go into a lot of different areas and ask you about things, but you're not expected to give your whole life story. That's not necessary. What they're there for is to help make sure they look at what diagnoses you might have, what services might help you. If you're in a crisis that day, they're going to address that. And maybe you need to go to the hospital. Maybe you need medication. They're going to try to address those things as quickly as possible. And you're going to leave that day with appointments. Most of our clients coming through admissions are going to leave with, many of them, an appointment with a case manager, an appointment with an outpatient provider, the medical and nursing end of it, where they're going to make sure that you have what you need in terms of getting linked with primary care if you need that, any kind of medical issues you might have. So yeah, you're going to leave there knowing what the next step is.
Thank you so much, Marianne. It definitely helps, I think, to know, what we're walking into when you make a big decision in life. I don't care what the decision is, right? It can be hard to make those decisions, and to know what to expect really helps. So thanks for sharing that with us today. So I'd like to just end us today by saying thank you to each one of you on behalf of Horizon and our listeners for being a part of today's discussion and being willing to have difficult conversations in hopes that someone listening can benefit from what you've experienced and all the things that you've learned along the way. So thank you all for being here. To our listeners who have tuned in to today's episode, let's not let the discussion end here. So go home and have these conversations with your friends, your families, and in your communities. As you do, know that we are here celebrating recovery alongside you, loudly and proudly.
Thank you for joining us on the Recovery Journey podcast with Horizon Behavioral Health. Remember, our greatest triumph is not in never failing, but in rising up every time we fall. If you live in Central Virginia and you or a loved one is ready to reach out for help, call Horizon today at 434-477-5000 to schedule your first appointment. Let us walk this journey with you, and together we can find hope and healing on the horizon.